When did you do this expedition?
This expedition took place,
October?
yeah, in October of last year. So, along that line, the Hilkamar expedition team traveled to Guatemala from October 1st to October 10th of 2025. And our proposed intent was to visit sites that we suspect are associated with the converted Lamanites. So specifically, we were planning to land in Guatemala City. All right, the first place we were going to visit is Zacualeo. I keep messing up on this one. Zacualeo, that's it. And then we were going to cross the Guatemala border into Mexico and visit El Lagatero and go up then to the waters of Mormon. There's an area up there called the Lagos de Montebello, and we were going to see if there were any hints of that those might have been the waters of Mormon. And then we were going to go over and visit Chincoteague and Tinapuente, and visit Comitan, the museum at Comitan, and then travel down to the coastline and visit Izapa, at which time then we would cross the border back over into Guatemala to visit Tacalica, El Baúl, and then back up to Guatemala City to the site of Caminalhuyu. That was our intent. When we got into Guatemala City and were renting the car, we found out very quickly that they would not allow us to drive that vehicle over the Mexican border. We could go to Belize, we could go to El Salvador, but we could not go into Mexico. Now we were holding out hope, and so day 2, October 2nd, we drove from Guatemala City up to Zacualeo, and it was at that time we found out there was no way. They just couldn't get us set up to be able to get in there. So we had to do a quick change in our plans. However, finally on day 3 we saw our first site, which is Zacualeo. And this is one of the sites, or one of the temples there. Here's the largest temple that's on the site. And basically what we discovered is that it appears that it has Olmec and Maya, Highland Maya influence. So, and that we kind of deciphered that out of the architecture of this one structure here on the easternmost side of the site. What that means is it's Olmec and Jaredite. I'm sorry, Olmec and Maya. And so that would be the Jaredites then and the Nephites that are blended, which is typical of most Lamanite cities, especially across the Pacific side of the Sierra Madres. And basically what this is telling us is they had some kind of a spiritual battle of some form that was that took place here. And then this is like many other, this particular section in the north end is like many other of the sites where it alludes to the afterlife and the glories of the afterlife. So that was a good find. We'd never been to this site before, and now we have an understanding of what this site was about and who was there.
How did you get that picture?
That was a Google Earth picture.
Okay.
Yep. So then when we left later that day and we traveled down through Quetzaltenango, we were going to go down to Tacalica because there was no way we could cross the Mexican border. Except we went through a lot of rain. That's a tunnel that goes through a mountain. It's a mountainous area in some of that region. And as it turned out, there was a mudslide over the road about 20 kilometers from us being able to get into the Redohuelu where we were going to spend the night. So we had to turn around and drive an hour back up to Quetzaltenango and spend the night there, so that on October 4th, day 4, we left out of Quetzaltenango. We took a different route so that we could come around the mountain another way and make our way down into Tocalica Baj. But we ran into rain again. This was the road that actually ran by Tocalica Baj, and you can see there it's just covered with these gutters along each side are just filled. Which means it was day 5 before we even got to our second site. But this is where we found out that God was working with us. When we got to the site, they would not let us go without a guide. We had to be there with a guide. And so this gentleman, I think his name was Paul, wasn't it Paul? He was taking us through, and we found out that the reason is because that was a Maya New Year. It was the day of the Maya New Year, and there were a bunch of Maya people who were there, and they were doing offerings at their certain places in the site because it is their land, their history, and so they were there to do their offerings for the new year, and we were not allowed to wander without a guide. Which was interesting because we ended up getting a very wonderful guided tour, very personal guided tour, and several of the places where we stopped, the guy said, "Oh yeah, you can get down in there. You can go down and take a look at that." And we ended up seeing, we'll see this later, this is a very important stone, my friends. And this is the actual carved stone. We couldn't see the one out on the site because there was a Mayan offering going on right in front of that. But the one that's out on the site is actually a replica. This is the original carved stone. And there's a whole bunch of other carved stones in here that are the originals as well, underneath that grass hut that we were able to get up close and personal with. And our guide was giving us all these bits of information about what they were about. Yes?
What is the name of this site?
This is Tocalica Baj. That's a Maya name. So once we finished this at this site, we then drove over to El Baú. And the next morning, by the way, that volcano there is El Fuego. And it was going like that almost all the time that we were down there. It had a plume going. But we tried to go to El Baú. We couldn't because it's owned by a sugar plantation or sugar company, and you had to schedule with them to go in very limited times, very limited days, and that just wasn't a day that anybody could get in. So we had to change again. And so we ended up driving up to the El Salvador border just outside of El Tazamal, so that the next day, October 7th, we were in El Tazamal. El Tazamal is, we'll see here in a little while, it's a city of Ishmael. And this is the only temple really that's at the site, but the temple isn't what we're there about. I'll show you what some details later. So we left El Tazamal, drove back down, because at this time we'd gotten confirmation from the sugar mill that we could go on Wednesday, and we had a set time from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. and had to be there. So we hightailed it back and spent the night short of Santa Lucia. Oh, and we had another delay in El Salvador, where, as you can see, there was a mudslide, and that's a huge tree that was crossing the road. We had to wait for crews to come with the machinery to move that stuff out of the way. So on October 8th, we finally got to El Baú. El Baú, I'll just real quick give you an overview of it. It does not appear to factor into anything that's in the Book of Mormon unless it's one of the 3 cities that did not convert. Almost everything here is zoomorphic. In other words, it's animals. Very few of actual people. But we took a long time. We had a wonderful guide who was with us the whole time, giving us details. A lot of lion or feline images here. And this one is particularly interesting. It's like a person, but it's got an animal face on both of these. So the point, the way I would interpret that is that the people never demonstrated human compassion for one another. They were caught up in power, that's the feline, or in other animalistic behaviors, which are indicated here by these different animal heads. And then once we finished there, we made our way back up to Kaminalhuyu, or to Guatemala City, and there, the next day we visited Kaminalhuyu, which is, we believe, where the king of all the Lamanites lived and where he ruled from. We spent a lot of time there walking through the different sites. They had some new digs that had opened up and where we could go through and see those. So that is an overview, and I wanted to share with you the personal testimony of how God orchestrates things. What we learned at Takalika really sealed a lot of our theories, in my mind anyway, of what was going on during the Lamanite conversion and then their covenant to keep their covenant of peace. And so we're going to start with the stuff here at El Tazamal and then make our way over to Takalika Baj. Okay? So first off, El Tazamal, city of Ishmael. Here is this, what you were looking at is the temple, and this is where the temple's located. Notice that just upwards of there, north of that, is a very large lagoon that's being used today as their water source. But right down here is a place that's called Laguna Seca, which is their second lagoon. And we believe that this is where King Lamoni would have had his flocks being watered. Okay? Why do we believe that? Because they found a ceramic statue in this location. And I want to share with you what that statue looks like. This is it. It's a 5-foot-tall ceramic statue that is called Sheepy Totec. They claim that the clothing it wears represents flayed skin because the name of that particular, the Sheepy Totec name, literally translates as Our Lord the Flayed One. However, this appears more like an artistic rendition of sheep's wool, of clothing that's sheep's wool. This particular rendition of Sheepy Totec demonstrates 2 aspects that are unique to the story of Ammon defending the king's flocks: the number of bands on the arms and legs, and the absence of the left forearm just below the elbow. All right, this would be a death mask kind of presentation. You see that the eyes are closed, the mouth is gaping open, and because of the other things I'm going to share with you, I think that these are indicating tears of regret. Now, what was it that Ammon used to slay the people that were scattering the flocks?
He was using a sling.
A sling. I think what we're seeing is an artist's rendition of a sling. You've got the leather strap here, you've got the leather pocket, that holds the rock. Okay? And we're going to count them. There's 1, there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and on this arm is 7. And notice that that left forearm is missing. It's like something's been cut off right midway on that forearm. So this is Ammon talking to King Lamoni. And it came to pass that Ammon, being filled with the Spirit of God, therefore he perceived the thoughts of the king. And he said unto him, Is it because thou hast heard that I defended thy servants and thy flocks, and slew 7 of their brethren with the sling and with the sword, and smote off the arms of others, in order to defend thy flocks and thy servants? Behold, is it this that causeth thy marvelings? So 7 offenders were slain, which is represented by the bands on the limbs of the statue. And the left hand with half of the left forearm is missing, assuming that the right hand would be holding a club or weapon. And if you look at the right hand, it's in this kind of shape, and it has a hole in it where something would slide in, right? So if someone were, if they were using the right hand to hold a club or a weapon, the left arm would be used to block blows from someone else coming in, like this, right? And therefore, the left arm would be the one that would be exposed to Ammon's sword. The El Tazamal Shepi Totek is unique from all others and contains symbolism that is unique to the Ammon story. Not to mention that it was found at the smaller lagoon where the flocks would be watered in order to keep the main water supply from being contaminated by animal waste. So we found that to be very compelling, to be able to make that connection of Al Tazamal being the city of Ishmael. One other. What you're looking at here is a carving on a very large stone that's out in the plaza by the temple. You have 1 carving, 2, 3, 4. You have 4 carvings on the same large stone. Now, these are renditions of that same. And what I want to suggest to you is the first one on the left is Ammon. It's Ammon. He's walking, he's coming into the city of Ishmael, and he's holding a bag or a bundle of some kind. I believe he's carrying with him the Word of God. It's the writings that Mosiah had caused to be written of all of the plates that they had. And notice that he's using his right hand. So the right hand, when we find stuff in the Maya, when they're using the right hand, it's indicating things that they are faithful to. They're consciously, it's their works that they're consciously faithful to accomplish. The left hand, what they do with the left hand, tends to be the consequence of whatever it is they're doing with the right. And so we believe that Ammon is coming into the city of Ishmael carrying the word, the gospel. And the byproduct of that, the consequence of that, is he's reaching out to King Lamoni. If you remember the conversion of King Lamoni, he was basically struck down in the spirit for 3 days. Right? And when he was awakened, he was like, praise God, I have seen my Redeemer. And so what we believe that this is indicating is that he's being high and lifted up, and that he was robed in the glory of heaven while he was there. And the 2 of them, Ammon and King Lamoni, reach out and interact with the king of all the Lamanites. Do you remember how that took place?
They were on the road.
They were.
Chariot.
That's right, they were on the road. And so we believe this is the king of all the Lamanites. Now here's El Tazamal, and we believe Taklikabaj is Midiani. Midiani is where Aaron were being held in prison. And you have to go through, if you're going to stay in the highlands, you have to go through Kaminalhuyu in order to get to Midiani. So they were on the road heading to Midiani to try and free Aaron. And they ran into the king of all the Lamanites. And the king of all the Lamanites said to his son, King Lamanite, "Why weren't you at the feast I held? How dare you not be there, my son? And who's this filthy Nephite that you're with?" Okay? So they end up having a confrontation. Now when Ammon had said these words unto him, talking about the king of all the Lamanites, the king of all the Lamanites answered him, saying, "I know that if I should slay my son, that I should shed innocent blood, for it is thou that hast sought to destroy him." And he stretched forth his hand to slay Ammon, but Ammon withstood his blows, and also smote his arm that he could not use it. So his right hand is laying limp on that knee. Everyone else is doing something, clasping or something with their right hand. He's not. With his left hand, he's holding on to his scepter. Why? Because when Ammon smote king of all the Lamanites, king of all the Lamanites knew that he was about to be killed, and he said, "Hey, whatever you want, I'll give you up to half my kingdom. You can take half my kingdom." And Ammon says, "No, the only thing I want is for King Lamoni to be autonomous. I want him to rule his own people without your interference. And I want you to release my brothers out of Midiani." And so he's clasping the hold of the whole of his kingdom is still there. Okay? Not by his effort, but because it was given to him. And therefore, we believe that this is Aaron. Aaron then came in, and he then shared the gospel with the king of all the Lamanites and converted the king of all the Lamanites. So here at El Tazamal is a rock that has these 4 carvings on it. And just like I just shared with you the story, someone could walk around that stone and say, here's the story of these 2 kings that were converted to the gospel.
Do you have any idea why Ammon and King Lamanite are wearing masks?
Yes, in the Maya sense, and we'll see this later. With the acceptance of the gospel, they have put on a new face. It is a new identity.
Just really, that's good.
Yeah. All right, so Taklikabaj. This is structure 12 at Taklikabaj, and I'm going to share with you something that could only be learned by having been there and seeing all of these things in context. The main stone I was telling you about that is important, that this is the offering stone that the Maya were putting their offerings on to make their burnt offerings. So we couldn't get to this one. But these other, we're going to go through these other smaller monuments that tell a story concerning this main one here. So this is a top-down line drawing of structure 12. The arrow is pointing at Stela 5, which is the center point, important stela we're going to look at here. So over at the far right is monument number 9, This is what it looks like. It's hard to see what it is, but it is an owl. An owl in the Maya belief system represents those like prophets who have spiritual knowledge and who are able to see into the unknown, to see into the night, and make sense of the landscape that they're walking through. So it's a spiritual ability to be able to see into the night. Owls, just like what we have today, are also considered harbingers of death. If there's a hoot owl, you've heard this, I know you have. If there's a hoot owl and you hear him over a period of time, it means somebody's going to die, right? So they are harbingers of death in that respect too. Okay, the next one is Monument 65. This is an Olmec face, and it's actually a death mask. His eyes are closed. So here you have an owl, someone who has wisdom and looking into the spiritual things, and then you have a death mask. And the third one is a little interesting. It's actually a crocodile that's coming out of the water. It's presenting out of the water. Now, go with me here, please. I have looked and looked for what a crocodile would represent in the Americas. And outside of the fact that it's a danger that is hidden and can be presented, I also went a little bit further and actually found something very interesting. If you go back to ancient Egypt, Sobek is a crocodile. He's worshipped in the Old Kingdom. He truly gained prominence in the Middle Kingdom, which, by the way, is the time frame that's right around Joseph of Egypt. Most notably in the 12th dynasty Pharaoh Amenemhat III. Amenemhat is the Pharaoh under which Joseph operated. Amenemhat III had taken a particular interest in the Fayum of Egypt, a region heavily associated with Sobek. Amenemhat and many of his dynastic contemporaries engaged in building projects to promote Sobek, projects that were often executed in the Fayum. So, we've been through this before. This is the Canal of Joseph. It is the Bar Yusuf, is what it's called. It's the Canal of Joseph. It comes off of the Nile River, about 100 miles to the south, and it runs parallel with the Nile, and then it empties into the Fayum. And the canal then feeds this reservoir and all of this region in there that they use to grow crops. It's part of the 7 years of plenty that Joseph was part of in preparation for the 7 years of lean. All right? So in this period, Sobek also underwent an important change. He was often fused with the falcon-headed god of the divine kingship, Horus. In other words, Sobek got adopted into the Pharaoh court and the godship. This brought Sobek even closer with the kings of Egypt, thereby giving him a place of greater prominence in the Egyptian pantheon. The fusion added a finer level of complexity to the god's nature, as he was adopted into the divine triad of Horus and his two parents, Osiris and Isis. Sobek became known as the god that has power to kill, but who also impregnates, so it's fertility, and restores the dismembered parts of Osiris, which is unity. So fertility and unity is what I pulled out of that. And so what we have here then is spiritual wisdom, looking into the future, choosing death, and the act that took place created a birth of something new that unified the people. So then we get to altar 5. This is altar 5, stela 5. And for the purpose of the line drawing, this line drawing will help us see it better. Okay? This person is the one who's nearest all of those events that were moving towards this center point. So the spiritual insight, the choice of death over life, and then this unifying beginning or fertility, impregnation of something that's beginning new. Right here is a numerical sequence, and it comes up to 1005. Why is that important? Because an Alma, now when the people saw that they were coming against them, they went out to meet them and prostrated themselves before them to the earth and began to call on the name of the Lord. And thus they were in this attitude when the Lamanites began to fall upon them and began to slay them with the sword. And thus, without meeting any resistance, they did slay 1005 of them. And we know that they are blessed, for they have gone to dwell with their God. So, that's what we have indicated here. These would be the 1005. Notice that the hands are bound. It's because of the covenant that they took, that they would not take up arms. Okay? Now, what about this other end? Starting on the far left. This is a stela that shows a man being swallowed by a jaguar. And what's interesting is it's almost like a distended tummy that looks like a ball. And anywhere we see a ball, usually it's indicating a people displaced or a people as a group. And so the jaguar is a symbol of power. So these people are being swallowed up by power, by governmental power. The next one is a person emerging out of the mouth of the jaguar with something in his hand, like a weapon of some sort. And so what it's indicating is that the mouth of the jaguar is actually stirred these people up to anger, stirred them up to war. So people are consumed by power, and then they're stirred up to war. The next one is a toad, a frog, which represents metamorphosis, which represents transformation. And so in the process of being stirred up, consumed by power, and stirred to war, when they actually met their enemy, many of them were transformed. So the ones on the left would be the ones who were transformed. And the number that's by them is 2,351. Okay, so we have two numbers that are juxtaposed. We have 1,005 and we have 2,351. Now when the Lamanites saw that their brethren would not flee from the sword, neither would they turn aside to the right hand or the left, but that they would lie down and perish and praise God, even the very act of perishing under the sword. Now when the Lamanites saw this, they did forbear from slaying them. And there were many whose hearts had swollen in them for those of their brethren who had fallen under the sword, for they repented of the things which they had done. And it came to pass that they threw down the weapons of war, and they would not take them again. For they were stung for the murders which they had committed, and they came down even as their brethren, relying upon the mercies of those whose arms were lifted to slay them. And it came to pass that the people of God were joined that day by more than the number who had been slain. And those who had been slain were righteous people. Therefore we have no reason to doubt but what they are saved. And there was not a wicked man slain among them, but there were more than 1,000 brought to the knowledge of the truth. Thus we see that the Lord worketh in many ways to the salvation of his people. The 1,005 that were slain, and the more who were converted that day. So you have the martyred and and the converted. That's why this is so important. Oh, and by the way, the largest offering on that site was right in front of that stela on October 5th when we were there. I don't know that they know the story, but they know it's important. So, now that's very compelling. It'd be one thing if we just found the stela, which we had many years ago, and we had found those numbers. But when you put that in context of what these are representing on either side, and where they began and then eventually led towards the conflict where they were against one another, and that was the outcome. Very compelling. Now, are there other evidences at this site? Yes, there are. This is the museum that we went into, and what you have here is you have a person that's kneeling, and on the back side his hands are bound, and he's decapitated. Now, I don't know that hands being bound is a literal thing that they did, but at least symbolically their hands were bound, because they covenanted with God that they would not pick up their arms to defend themselves, but they would be at the mercies of their brethren. This is stela number 1 at Takalika. Again, this person who's in kingly attire is decapitated. This is a breath scroll coming out of the top of the torso. And there are here 7 rings. And we'll take a look at that here in a minute, why that's important. All right, this particular stela was an amazing find. What we have here is a rendition of, it looks like a lady, but it may be a priest in a robe. And this is what our guide was telling us. This is a bag full of the seed, and she's carrying the seed and spreading it, scattering the seed. So she's planting, right? Back to our fertility theme. But here is this interesting appendage on the headdress. Notice we have a total of 5 bows, of which there's 1 here at the top and then 4 together. This is a mural from San Bartolo, and this is demonstrating the priesthood coming out of the lowlands, coming up to share the gospel with the kings of the highlands. This king is sitting on a codex that's sacred. So this is the written word, the gospel. And he's naked. He's thrown off his jaguar pelt. In other words, he's thrown off any desire for power or for the governmental royal stuff that he'd been a part of. And he sits naked before God. And this priest is coming up and giving him a new identity. That's a mask that he's accepting. So it's a new identity. He's throwing off the old and taking on the new. Now, right up here in this headdress, we've got another division of 1 and 4. And I believe that's representing Alma and the 4 sons of Mosiah, because that's who is the head of the church that time. That's part of this outreach that's going on. So the same thing is going on here. It's representing Alma as the high priest, and then the 4 sons of Mosiah, who are in essence doing the missionary work among the Lamanites. Now, here is another device that is 7 rings coming off of her hair. I think that this is a representation of the church that's being developed, that's being created with this conversion that went on. And here's the 7 rings. Now these are they who were converted unto the Lord, the people of the Lamanites who are in the land of Ishmael, and also the people of the Lamanites who are in the land of Midian, and also the people of the Lamanites who were in the city of Nephi, and also of the people of the Lamanites who were in the land of Shiloh, and in the land of Shemlon, and the city of Lemuel, and in the city of Shemnalon. 7 cities, 7 rings. This event unified them into a chain that was not going to be broken. This apparently, I would interpret this as King Anti-Nephi-Lehi. We know that the king of all the Lamanites died, and they buried him. But King Anti-Nephi-Lehi, all we're given in the Book of Mormon are little snippets of how he was king and they no longer wanted him to be king, and there was a warm contention among everyone and so on. And then you don't hear about him anymore. After this event where they lay down their lives, you don't hear about him anymore. But we find evidence all over the lowlands about this event taking place, that he was one of them who was killed. Now, this is in Tikal, and here you have somebody who's holding up that almost that exact same chain symbol, right? And it came to pass that the Amalekites and the Ammonites and the Lamanites who were in the land of Amulon, and also in the land of Helam, who were in the land of Jerusalem and in Fine, and all the land round about, who had not been converted and had not taken upon them the name of Anti-Nephi-Lehi, were stirred up by the Amalekites and by the Ammonites to anger against their brethren. And I think what we're seeing here is a representation of the 3 cities that did not convert. The archaeologists say, this person is this person is this person. But these look very different from one another. They look individualized. They do not look like the same person. And what we can decipher from this is, with his right hand, he's trying to bring the 7 cities back into submission. This would be the 3 cities of the Lamanites who are trying to undermine this new movement and bring these 7 cities back into submission. But in the process, they take the head of the king right here in the left elbow. That's the consequence of his effort to try and wrestle them back. They beheaded the king. Now, another way of interpreting this is these may be the 3 cities of the Lamanites, and these may be the Ammonites and the Amalekites that are working in concert with them. We're told that of the converted, there was not one Ammonite or Amalekite. All of the converted were Lamanites. But here you see the 7-ring chain here. This is in Tikal, down in the lowlands. This is in Tapali-Gabash, over off the Pacific. What I'm getting at is the symbols are uniform across these different sites because of the story that's being told. Now, this is at Tikal. This is Temple 1. And inside Temple 1, there's a very large burial. And we believe, I believe anyway, that the person who's inside that temple is the king of all the Lamanites. That is his burial place. Because Tikal, as it turns out, is kind of the gateway into the land of Jershon. And so I believe that that's the king of all the Lamanites. What they found was someone came in after that was built, and they tunneled in and they put in that same room where that temple, or where that burial was found, a pile of bones that in essence is the entire skeleton, no head. San Bartolo they found the royal family in a cistern, and then a head with no body of a male. And I think, it's my suggestion at least at this point, that this is King Anti-Nephi-Lehi, as were the bones that were buried with his father in Tikal. Now, this is not a very good rendition, and I'm sorry about this. This is the Bonaparte murals. The Bonaparte murals tell the Lamanite conversion story. And what you see here is you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The 7 cities that were converted, and 1, 2, 3 that stood against the 7 converted cities. And this person here, all the archaeologists agree, this person was beheaded. That's his head. This is the knife that's being wielded. And these are the people around him who are looking at the blood on their hands, and they are aghast at what they've done. So this is King Anti-Nephi-Lehi, one of the 7 cities that were converted. Yeah.
I'd just like to say the most beautiful sermon in this book, or one of them, is the sermon of King Anti-Nephi-Lehi, who, as a leader of his people, gave the reasons for not breaking their covenant. So it only makes sense that he was at the head of his people and probably the first one that lost his life.
Yep. Now, this stela is found at Bonaparte, where the murals are located. I believe this is a Nephite warrior out of Yashiklan. His focus in his right hand is this spear with these covenant bows on them. We know that there are 6 of them here. This is gone. That may have been the 7th one. There are numbers down here at the bottom that talk, there's 10 on one side, there's 7 on the other. And the reason he is focused on these people keeping their covenant is because the king has been beheaded. This is a beheading that's over here on the left side. Or it's our right, it's his left elbow.
David, you mentioned Yashiklan, which is
Zarahemla. Yeah, Zarahemla, sorry. Now, the royal cistern at Canquin in Guatemala, there were 33 royal bodies found buried here. They were ritualistically killed and buried. Apparently, it must have been family members or something. They were laid to rest honorably, with respect. But again, another royal group who had died and were buried here. This is a hieroglyphic stairway number 2 at Dos Pilas. It details a war with Tikal. This is a rubbing. It shows a person struggling and someone being killed here. These particular passages that are on either side here relates that there were piles of heads and pools of blood when they invaded Tikal. Tikal again being kind of the gateway into the land of Jershon. This particular vase, quite interesting. It's a roundabout way of talking about the person who killed King Anti-Nephi-Lehi. This was found in Kaminal-Huyuk, which is where the Lamanites were ruling. If you remember the story of Amalickiah, he couldn't get the government to change in Zarahemla, so he comes up to the Lamanites and he talks the king into letting him have control of the armies. And then he goes and brings the army in to meet the king. And when the servants are down below, they come up and stab the king and leave him lying in his gore. That's right out of what the scripture says. Well, this is a king who's been disemboweled, and he has on his belt the head of another king. So that king that was killed by Amalickiah's servant actually had already taken the head of another king, King Anti-Nephi-Lehi. So it's kind of like a comeuppance, right? I mean, you reap what you sow. But we found that at Kaminalahuyu there in Guatemala City. This is a statue from Tony Na, ritualistically beheaded. But what's interesting is, you remember we saw that owl being the one who was wise, the spiritual wisdom of King Anti-Nephi-Lehi. This is an owl here. You don't see an owl very often on this stuff. So this is unique. By the way, Tony Na is the city of Ammonihah. Ammonihah factors into all of this because when the Lamanites, when they realized what had happened, the Ammonites and the Amalekites had put them up to this, to kill their brethren. They went back and they laid siege to Ammonihah and destroyed Ammonihah. Well, this is Tony Na. This is Ammonihah. Here we also have people who were bound, beheaded, beheaded. And then, if that wasn't enough, this is the frieze at Ammonihah, or at Tony Na, and it demonstrates the judgment on Ammonihah for their role in stirring up the Lamanites to kill their own brethren. And in essence, you have the rats, the ones who were actually stirring up these people. This is a ball, which is a people, and so he's stirring them up and getting them to do this work of death and take the head of another. And this is Quetzal feathers, which would mean it's a sacred judgment that's come upon them. That's why the head's upside down. It's a sacred judgment of death that has come upon them. So, everything that I've shown you today comes from El Tazumo, Kaminalahuyu, Takalika. This is the origin of the conversion story. But when things began to get really dangerous for the converted ones, they leave, they come down, and they ask Ammon, see if we got some place we can go. Ammon runs into Alma. Alma takes it to the people of Zarahemla, but they said, yeah, you can have Jershon. Well, Tikal is kind of the gateway into Jershon. It's San Bartolo, Lamanite, Naranjo, all of these regions up here in the eastern part of Bataan and Belize. But it also involves these two that had something to do with the attack on the converted. Tony Na, or Ammonihah, received the judgment of God for what they had done. Dos Pilas actually talks about their invasion on Tikal and the piles of heads and pools of blood. Canquin is where there was a royal family who'd been killed and ritualistic buried. Bonampak is when all of this fell apart and the converted Lamanites had grown weary of having the Nephites die on their behalf. They all assimilated into the city of Melech, which we believe is Bonampak, which is right next to Zarahemla. It's real close, like, 30 miles, 30 or 40 miles away. All the evidences I've shown you today give us the understanding that all of these symbols are not anomalous. They're all telling the same story. And it's on a much grander scale than most people can put together. That's what we found when we were going this fall. It all fell together when we were in Takalika again. We'd been there once before, and it just takes time to assimilate these understandings and do the research and find, oh, well, this happened over here, and this thing happened here, and here's this symbol, and we find that same symbol back here. And all of a sudden, we realized they're all sharing the same story. It's their history of the Lamanites, their conversion, and their commitment to that covenant that they made with God. So, any questions?
That point, a circle, does that fit in?
There's nothing, what we find at Palenque is the Christ testimony. His birth, his death, his resurrection, and then why he came. It's the gospel story, basically. But the converted Lamanites and their story seems to be in the southern part of the lowlands and in the highlands, the southern highlands. Anything else? Questions? Yeah.
So at the beginning, you had the first place that we went,
Sequoia.
that had the site. Could you bring that up real quick on the screen there? It was like, second or third slide.
I think you're being difficult.
Oh, I think he's.
I'm used to it with Greg.
You're used to
So the overview.
That
Yeah. Can you in 2 minutes or less, just go through a general overview of what those are laying out?
Okay, well, what we believe, this is talking about creation, the beginning of all creation and the purpose that God set in order for the gospel, the fall of man and the gospel. But what we have here are 10 pillars on this end and 6 on this. Well, 10 and 6 is 16. 16 we find very often affiliated with the Olmec, the Jaredites. It all goes back to the 16 stones that the brother of Jared Christ had touched those 16 stones to give them light. And that's very central to their identity. So together, there were 16. However, once the Lamanites came in, there were 10 Lamanite cities in the kingdom, 10 vassal kings in the kingdom. And so the identity is they are both Olmec and Lamanite. We believe that Laman and Lemuel married into the Olmec or into the Jaredite clans. And actually there's evidence of that with intermarriage going on between Teotihuacan and Kaminalhuyu. Teotihuacan being up in the highlands of the Mexico Valley, and then Kaminalhuyu is Guatemala City. So yeah, that's their origin as a people, their identity of who they are. As you come across, there's indications of things that indicate sacred. There's doorways of 3, pillars of 3, stairs, and so on. Anytime that you see a ball court, it's indicating a spiritual battle. It's the battle between the physical and the spiritual. And how one overcomes that battle will depend on how they enter into the afterlife. It's interesting, this largest right here is, I was looking at this the other day and picked this up. It's a total of 8 levels tall. And there's a major, you see this real wide break right here? There's 5 and then there's 3. Well, 5 represents the walk through our physical world. It's the 4 directions and the center point where those 4 directions meet. And however, if we raise the axis of earth to heaven, that's 3 points. Earth is 1, the midpoint, and then the heavens would be the 3rd point. And that then, the number 8 represents rebirth, born again, or resurrection. So the numbers are there. The numbers are there to indicate they had an understanding of a spiritual mathematics, because we find those all the way throughout the architecture throughout all of Mesoamerica.
I thought the Jaredites were destroyed except for the Korean.
And that's a good question.
And the Mulekites found him.
What we have come to understand is that when they're talking about the destruction, they're talking about the destruction of the royal families, the ruling classes, their identity as a people. So all of the families destroyed one another, and there's no one left to rule. So their identity as a people is gone. However, we have found that there's all kinds of evidence that there were millions of people still around. They didn't have a dog in the fight anymore. They didn't care. Most of them had walked away from all of the wars because it became senseless to them.
Kind of like today.
Kind of like today. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, everyone.